The silence is deafening, a heavy blanket that suffocates the air out of his lungs. He sits in a small, dimly lit room, the walls closing in on him like a vice. The only sound is the soft ticking of a clock on the mantel, a steady heartbeat that echoes the turmoil within. His eyes are cast downward, fixed on the worn, scuffed boot that sits on the floor in front of him. The boot is a deep, rich brown, polished to a high shine, but it's the scars that etch its surface that tell the real story. The scars that crisscross its leather skin, like a topographic map of pain and suffering. The room is sparse, with only a few pieces of furniture to break up the emptiness. A single bed sits against one wall, its blankets pulled tight and smooth. A small wooden dresser stands against another, its drawers closed and still. The air is thick with the scent of old wood and dust, a smell that is both familiar and comforting. But it's the boot that holds his attention, the boot that seems to draw him in with an otherworldly pull. He can feel its weight, its solidity, its presence. It's as if the boot is a tangible connection to a past that he can't quite grasp. As he sits there, the memories begin to creep in like whispers in the darkness. He remembers the feel of the sun beating down on his skin, the taste of sweat and dust, the sound of gunfire and screams. He remembers the smell of smoke and blood, the feel of his heart racing in his chest. The memories are fragmented, disjointed, but they're there, lurking just beneath the surface. He can feel them like a physical presence, a weight that presses down on him. The boot seems to be the catalyst, the trigger that sets the memories loose. He can see himself, standing in a dusty, barren landscape, the boot on his foot. He can feel the weight of his pack, the rifle slung over his shoulder. He can hear the sound at his comrades, their laughter and jokes, their shouts and screams. The memories are bittersweet, a mix of joy and pain, of camaraderie and loss. As he sits there, lost in the past, the clock ticks on, a steady heartbeat that marks the passage of time. The room grows darker, the shadows deepening. Like wounds that won't heal, the boot seems to grow larger, its presence more imposing, like a monument to the pain and suffering that he's endured. He can feel the weight of it, the weight of his memories, the weight of his guilt. It's a crushing weight, a burden that he carries with him always. The silence is broken by the sound of rain, a soft patter that begins as a gentle whisper and grows into a steady drumbeat. The sound is soothing, a balm to his frazzled nerves, but it's also a reminder of the storm that rages within him. The rain washes away the dust and dirt, but it can't wash away the memories, the pain, the guilt. Those are etched into his soul, like scars on the boot. The rain is a reminder that some wounds will never heal, that some scars will always remain. As the rain continues to fall, he slowly rises to his feet, the boot still fixed in his gaze. He feels a sense of trepidation, a sense of uncertainty as he begins to move towards the door. The room seems to grow smaller, the walls closing in on him, as he reaches out to touch the boot. It's a gesture of longing, of nostalgia, of regret. He can feel the leather beneath his fingers, the scars that etch its surface. The boot is a tangible connection to his past, a reminder of the pain and suffering that he's endured. As he stands there, frozen in time, the rain continues to fall, a steady beat that echoes the turmoil within. The rain-soaked streets were empty, save for the lone figure of a man, his eyes cast downward, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. The sound of raindrops hitting the pavement was like a relentless drumbeat, echoing the turmoil that churned within him. His name was James, a soldier who had seen the worst of humanity. And now he had returned to his hometown, driven by a promise he had made to a fallen comrade. The memories of that fateful day still lingered, like an open wound that refused to heal. The smell of sweat, the taste of dust, and the sound of gunfire all came flooding back, threatening to consume him. He had thought that time would dull the pain, but it only seemed to sharpen it, like a knife cutting through the silence. The bota marrón desgastada, a worn brown boot, sat on the floor, a tangible reminder of his connection to the past, a symbol of the weight he carried. As he walked, the rain-soaked streets seemed to blur together like a watercolor painting in the rain. The sound of his footsteps was the only constant, a reminder that he was still moving, still breathing. He had come to fulfill a promise, to check on the family of his fallen comrade, Alex. The thought of facing them, of seeing the pain in their eyes, was like a weight that pressed upon his chest. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of guilt, unable to find a lifeline to cling to. The door creaked as he pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty hallway. The house was quiet, the only sound the ticking of a clock, a reminder that time was passing, that life was moving on, even if he wasn't. He felt like a ghost, a specter haunting the halls of his own memories. The air was thick with the scent of old books and stale air, a smell that transported him back to a time when life was simpler, less complicated. As he moved through the house, the silence was oppressive, like a physical presence that pressed upon him. He felt like he was walking through a minefield, never knowing when the next step would trigger an explosion of emotions. The memories seemed to seep from the walls, like blood from a wound, reminding him of all that he had lost. He thought of Alex, of the laughter they had shared, of the tears they had dried. The pain was like a living thing, a creature that wrapped itself around his heart, squeezing tight. The sound of footsteps broke the silence, like a crack of thunder on a summer day. James turned, his eyes locking onto the figure of a woman, her face etched with lines of sorrow and loss. She was Alex's mother, a woman who had lost her son, her child, her reason for living. The pain in her eyes was like a mirror, reflecting the anguish that James felt. He felt like he was staring into the abyss, with no safety net to catch him if he fell. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words were like a lifeline, a rope thrown to a drowning man. James felt like he was grasping for it, like a desperate man clinging to a straw. He wanted to tell her that he was sorry for not being able to save Alex, for not being able to bring him home. But the words caught in his throat, like a fishbone stuck in his gullet. The woman's eyes seemed to bore into his soul, like a drill cutting through steel. James felt like he was being flayed alive, his emotions laid bare for all to see. He wanted to turn away, to hide from the pain, but his feet seemed rooted to the spot. The silence was oppressive, like a weight that pressed upon his chest. He felt like he was suffocating, like a man drowning in a sea of guilt. And then, like a storm cloud parting to reveal the sun, the woman's face softened. The lines of sorrow seemed to ease, like the gentle lapping of waves on a summer shore. "It's not your fault," she said, her voice like a balm to his soul. The words were like a key, unlocking the door to a prison he had built around himself. James felt like he was stepping out into the sunlight, blinking away the darkness that had haunted him for so long. The sound of her voice was like music, a melody that soothed his soul. James felt like he was being wrapped in a warm blanket, like a child being comforted by a mother's love. The pain was still there, but it was no longer overwhelming. He felt like he could breathe again, like a man who had been underwater for too long. The weight of his guilt was still there, but it was no longer crushing him. As he looked into the woman's eyes, James felt like he was seeing himself, like he was staring into a mirror. The pain and the sorrow were still there, but they were no longer alone. There was a sense of peace, of acceptance that seemed to emanate from her. It was like a beacon shining brightly in the darkness. James felt like he was being drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. The silence that followed was like a warm bath, soothing his soul. James felt like he was melting, like ice dissolving in the sun. The weight of his guilt was still there, but it was no longer overwhelming. He felt like he could carry it, like a man who had been given a new lease on life. The woman's eyes seemed to hold a deep understanding, a knowledge that only came from experiencing pain and sorrow. As he turned to leave, the woman's voice stopped him. "Wait," she said, her voice like a gentle breeze on a summer day. James turned, his eyes locking onto hers. "There's something I want to show you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words were like a puzzle piece, fitting into a larger picture that James couldn't quite see. He felt like he was being drawn into a mystery, like a man who had stumbled into a labyrinth. The woman led into a small room, the walls lined with books and mementos. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust. James felt like he was stepping into a time capsule, a room that had been frozen in time. The woman's eyes seemed to sparkle, like a child showing off a treasured possession. "This was Alex's room," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words were like a key, unlocking a door to a world that James had never known. As he looked around the room, James felt like he was seeing Alex in a new light. The books and mementos seemed to tell a story of a man who had lived and loved and laughed. The pain and the sorrow were still there, but they were no longer overwhelming. James felt like he was seeing the beauty in the brokenness, like a man who had stumbled upon a hidden garden. The room was like a sanctuary, a place where he could find peace and solace. The sound of the woman's voice broke the silence, like a bird singing in the morning. "I want you to have this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. James turned, his eyes locking onto a small, leather-bound book. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. The woman's eyes seemed to sparkle, like a child giving a gift to a loved one. "It was Alex's journal," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words were like a puzzle piece, fitting into a larger picture that James couldn't quite see. As he took the book, James felt like he was holding a piece of Alex's soul. The weight of it was like a tangible thing, a reminder of the promise he had made. He felt like he was being entrusted with a treasure that he vowed to protect and cherish. The woman's eyes seemed to hold a deep understanding, a knowledge that only came from experiencing pain and sorrow. James felt like he was being given a new lease on life, a chance to redeem himself and find peace. The silence that followed was like a warm bath, soothing his soul. James felt like he was melting, like ice dissolving in the sun. The weight of his guilt was still there, but it was no longer overwhelming. He felt like he could carry it, like a man who had been given a new lease on life. The woman's eyes seemed to hold a deep understanding, a knowledge that only came from experiencing pain and sorrow. As he turned to leave, James felt like he was walking into a new dawn, a dawn that promised hope and redemption. The darkness was still there, but it was no longer overwhelming. He felt like he could face it, like a man who had been given a new lease on life.